Now, let's look at the two extremes here, salvation by works. When Jesus walked this earth, there was a theology that existed. He walked right into this. I mean, it was salvation by works. What they had at that time when Jesus walked this earth was something called the oral law. Now, the oral law was fence building around the Ten Commandments. And every one of the Ten Commandments, there were instructions on exactly how to keep each one of those Ten Commandments perfectly. The Sabbath day, there was a Sabbath day journey. You couldn't walk but so far. You couldn't do this. You couldn't do that. You could pick a lot about harvesting. If you picked a few grapes off the vine, that's okay. But if you pick a cluster, you're harvesting. You can't do that. That's sin. So the oral law was fence building around each one of the Ten Commandments. And if you kept that oral law perfectly, you could achieve righteousness, self-righteousness, of course. But that was their form of righteousness. Now Jesus, this is the mindset, the theology that Jesus came into when he walked this earth. Salvation by works. And he blew it out of the water. I mean, he blew out that you can't get right with God. First of all, you got to deal with your past, your past sins. What are you going to, even if you get it right by keeping the law perfectly, what about all that past stuff you did? Who's going to forgive you of that? So he blew that concept out of the water, salvation by works. How long did this theology take to develop, salvation by works, that Jesus entered into and walked right into? It took hundreds, thousands, it took thousands of years. And basically, as long as people were believing that they could achieve their righteousness by works, they were cut off from God's Spirit. Now let's take the other extreme, antinomian belief. That basically the antinomian belief exists today among the Protestant people in mainstream churchianity, mainstream Christianity. Antinomian is a person who maintains that Christians are freed from the moral law by virtue of grace. Now, how long did this take to develop? Well, it took hundreds of years. It took thousands of years for this concept to be built upon and for people to believe, no, we have no obligation whatsoever toward the moral law. Now, when the Protestants first came out of Catholicism and adopted this antinomian teaching, I think originally the people, even though they said, okay, there's no duty toward the moral law, they understood. Okay, they understood when they first came out that, well, of course, I mean, I'm not going to steal from my neighbor. I'm not going to take his wife. In other words, they still submitted to the morality of the law. But as generations came along, younger generations came along, they started thinking, well, if there is no duty toward the moral law of God, then why should I pay any attention to the laws of man? Over the process of time, this led to relativism, which, what's right for me may not be right for you, and what's right for you may not be right for me. And then, of course, that led to, the theory of evolution, that we evolved from scum or, something off the backside of, I don't know. It's a crazy concept, but it gave way, relativism, evolution, all this eventually became the mindset. So this antinomian teaching, that people are freed from the moral law by virtue of grace, it has led to the godless society that we see today. Because no one pays any attention to the moral law of God, and they barely pay any attention to the laws of man.